Hi everyone, long time no see. I have a real backlog of things that I want to make, so this is going to be the first in a series of little videos addressing some misunderstandings that I have seen reflected in the comments on my wall under different videos. And this one is something I've discussed down there with several commentators, but it's time to make a little video about it just to make it really clear. What the crux of the rumor that people who are J's, those are the 8 of the 16 Myers-Briggs temperament indicator types that have J in their anagram, so-called judgers. What those judgers all have in common is that they have a judging function that would be a decision-making function, either the feeling function or a thinking function, that is within the top 2 spots of their cognitive function stack as either their dominant or auxiliary function, and a judging function up there that has an extroverted attitude. What that means with having an extroverted attitude is that the processes of that function, if you like, are very much geared or oriented towards the external world, the objective world. And since it's a decision-making function and it's operating primarily within the external world, or its focus rather, that's incorrect. Its focus for its cogitative processes is more on the external world than the interior world, the subjective world. There is a greater tendency for those 8 types versus the other 8 so-called perceiver types to try to create effects in their environment. And the way those effects are, and this is very, very general, very, very, very general, a generalization, but a general way that those effects can be created in the environment has to do with tidiness of that environment. So what I say is that the judgers, and I'm not just getting this from nowhere. There are plenty of sources you can look to about the MBTI to see what I'm talking about. But it is something also that I've seen with my own eyes over and over and over again in 20 years of really, really thinking and observing a lot about the MBTI in real life. Where was I? So the judging function is, or what I say of the so-called judgers is that there is a greater likelihood, again, trends, generalizations, granted, never said otherwise. There is a tendency among people of the judging types, the judger types, I should say, who they are more likely, more of them, to have a greater overall tendency towards a combo of things. That would be, I would say, tidiness in the environment, organization of affairs generally, and planfulness. A greater tendency for a liking of closure. And usually what attends that, not in all cases, of course, but what often attends a mental preoccupation with such things and a temperamental leaning towards such things is also a development of skill in executing and effecting such things in one's life. So, wherever possible. So that's all I've ever been saying about that. But of course, that allows for an enormous variability, absolutely enormous. And I never have, and nor would I ever claim otherwise. And there are going to be plenty of exceptions. And anyway, I'm going to make another video shortly, sort of clarifying some things that a lot of viewers seem to have thought that I said or think that I never have, and I don't, and I won't. But for this one, really what it all comes down to in terms of this, rumor that people of the judging types are more likely to have a tidy and personal environment, that is an environment that they have control over, such as their homes if they live alone, or their rooms if they live with, their rooms, their offices, their desk space, whatever is their territory within a shared space that is just under their control. There will be, quite often a greater tendency to tidiness, then you will see with most members, most of the time, overall, over time, with most people who identify with the perceiver types. And this tidiness really is so again, I can't say it enough, I guess, because people keep misunderstanding me. And I understand why they do too. It's a complicated message. And lots of caveats, and it's not. There's no certitude about this whatsoever. It's a very, very loose guideline. But nonetheless, I still think it's interesting. I still think it's relevant to the MBTI, and I still think it can be useful in some cases when more pertinent evidence is there. That's a big, big, big caveat with that. So, all right, this this tendency to greater tidiness more of the time. More often among more people who are of the judging types. It's a matter of emphasis, and this is the other thing that's super important about it. Really what it all boils down to, these differences that I'm trying to sort of outline and discuss and propose and whatever and interact with the audience about, is what it comes down to is not so much, that such and such a person of a such and such a type does this thing, even regularly or all the time. Really what is at the crux of it, what really separates people of the perceiving type, the perceiver types from the judger types in this behavioralism, when it even applies, which is quite often, but it's still pretty fuzzy, is intentionality. Intentionality is the key thing here, not so much this or that standard operating procedure for how you put your socks away, or how you arrange your bookcase, or how you, how sophisticated your boot rack is, if you even have one in the hallway. It's not really about that. So I've never tried to explain the vast, let alone discount, let alone refute the enormous range of variability there can be in the way even people of one type tend to arrange their possessions in their own environments that they have total control over. But what is very different, and what I think if you go around, if you can investigate this with people who really do know what their types are, and have disclosed that to you, and it can be a topic of discussion, what I think you will find is if you speak to people of the judging types who identify with that, and ask them about their personal environments, and ask them about the little routines they have for putting things back in their place, for having a sense of objects having a home, if you like, that they have thought about and that you've considered, and then they have enacted. I think what you're going to find with a lot of those judgers is that they, although they may not have a spick and span house all the time, they may not care about things getting really messy and staying that way for a while. They may not be incredibly picky about how things are arranged materially, or that they stay static for long periods of time. I think that actually does tend to more often be the case with the SJ types, but the so-called guardians. However, for most of the Js, there is a lot of variability. But here's the thing that is not so variable. Unlike the perceiver types, overall, what I would call, I just called in a comment section to someone who was disputing something similar with me as regards the INFJs. I've had many, many from the INFJs about this. Is that what I would call the random accretion quotient overall of a person's personal environment, random accretion quotient of the objects in that environment is pretty consistently going to be higher. That's going to be the trend among people of the perceiving types versus people of the judging types. So again, it's even more to the point, besides, is it cluttered or not? Is it busy or not? Is it clean or not? Is it anal or not? What is much more pertinent, and what is at the heart of it, if you boil it all down, is intentionality. If you take someone who identifies with one of the judging types, who has a cluttery personal environment, and you take a perceiver type person who has a cluttery environment, and you interview them, and you do this with many members of perceiving types or judging types, I really think that what you're going to find This is what I've seen and heard over 20 years, and what I've read about also. Is that the judgers, in the judger's clutter, if you ask them about the objects that make up that clutter, why is that there? Was that intentional that it be placed there? Was it intentionally kept rather than thrown out or shoved into the back of a closet in a willy-nilly mess and forgotten about? The judgers are going to tend to have way more immediate answers that demonstrate that what is in that clutter is much more intentional overall than what the perceivers have in their clutter, which is going to be a mix of intentional, some very highly intentional, and even fussy in some cases, very placé, but the perceivers are going to have way more stuff that's lying around that they never thought about. They never thought about it. They don't care. And in fact, it's almost, for some of us, especially the NFPs or the NPs, I can speak for that group with a lot of confidence because I am one as an ENFP, and I have them populating my life like crazy. So I just know about them. I've lived with them. I've spent time with them. I've spent time in their homes and collaborated with them on things and blah, 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 blah. And what I've seen over and over and over and over and over and over again is that with us, we have little stacks and little piles and little gatherings of objects that are almost invisible to us because we didn't intend for them to be that way. We just threw the mail in that corner for 3 weeks or 3 days or whatever it was. We just left it there. We didn't care to think about it and think about any kind of a system or think about, where would be the right place for this or the most beautiful place for this or the most effective place for this to be, organizationally speaking. We just threw it there and forgot about it. We didn't care. We didn't place it there. More of the judger types, people of the judging types, they're going to be able to tell you that in their clutter, they know first of all, they have a better idea of what is in their clutter. They are more aware of what constitutes the clutter. They have more reasons more of the time for why it's there, and much more of the time than for the perceiver types, they have an idea of where it's going to go when they get around to tidying it up because they have a more developed sense more of the time than the perceiver types that objects have a home and that they should eventually be replaced there. Whether they feel the urge to replace them right away or whether they feel, they don't often feel the urge to replace them with any haste at all. But the difference is between the J's and the P's here, fundamentally what it is intentionality. That's what you look for. So of course, and this also covers the but because this again, and I've never advocated otherwise, this necessarily yokes behavioralisms and objective data and patterns that one may see there. They always should be verified by discussion with whoever's stuff that is before you make any kind of assumptions at all about why things are the way they are in the objective world. You absolutely need to know what the person was thinking about that stuff to even begin to have a hint of a clue as to what kind of cognitive functions may have been at work in the placement of those things, and in terms of beginning to even guess what type that person would most likely what their temperament would align with, what they'd identify with the most. Okay. One down. Nice to be back. Thank you if you were watching. And thank you for those of you who've been participating like crazy in the comments. I love it. It's great. And it's really it's wonderful information. So thank you very much for that too. Those of you who've done that. Always appreciate it. Goodbye.